Welcome back to Let's Talk About It. I'm Lonnie, and today we're going to walk into a case that still feels unreal even decades later. It's the kind of story that makes you stop mid-thought and ask yourself how a person can carry that much darkness around and still look ordinary. We're talking about Randy Kraft, a man investigators believe hunted young men for years, often along the same highways people used every day, and somehow kept it going across multiple places, multiple police agencies, and multiple eras of investigative blind spots. You might know him as the Scorecard Killer. And if that nickname already gives you a chill, just wait until you hear where it came from. Let's start with the moment everything finally snapped into focus. It's May 14th, 1983. A California Highway Patrol officer sees a Toyota Celica on I-5 and pulls it over. Nothing about the car screams, major case. Nothing about the driver immediately sets off alarms either. The driver is Randy Kraft. He's 38. He works as a computer consultant, the kind of job title that for most people signals routine, stable, unremarkable. But then the officer looks over at the passenger seat. There's a young man there, Marine Lance Corporal Terry Gambrell, and he's not responsive. He's not waking up, and within moments, it becomes clear this isn't a situation where someone needs paramedics and a glass of water. This is something else entirely. This is a crime scene sitting in the front seat of a car on the side of the freeway. Later, the autopsy tells a story that's hard to even repeat out loud. Terry had been drugged heavily, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Alcohol and tranquilizers were in his system. The timeline suggests he died within hours of that stop. And what stands out, according to investigators at the time, is Kraft's demeanor. Calm, controlled, like he's been stopped for a broken taillight, not caught with a dead man beside him. So the obvious question becomes, who is this guy? And what else has he done? When police search Kraft's car, they find something that turns this from one horrifying homicide into something much bigger. They discover a handwritten list. 61 short entries. Not full names. Not clear dates. Just brief, coded phrases, little fragments that look meaningless until you start lining them up with missing persons reports and unsolved murders. Things like stable, Portland, 2 in 1 hitch, Marine Carson. At first glance, it could look like nonsense. A shorthand list, notes for work, some weird personal reminder system. But investigators start comparing those words and phrases to cases, and the matchups are too exact to ignore. Marine Carson, for example, lines up with a Marine found murdered near Carson, California. 2 in 1 hitch appears to correspond to a case with 2 victims discovered together. Portland points to a young man killed near Portland in the mid-1970s. And that's when the meaning of that paper hits like a punch. The list isn't random. It's not a diary. It's not innocent. It's closer to a ledger, a tally, a private scoreboard of human lives. And that list becomes the reason people start calling him the Scorecard Killer. Now, here's what makes this case especially terrifying. If you look at the victim pattern, it's not flashy. It's not dramatic in a way that immediately ties cases together, especially not with the limitations law enforcement had at the time. Many of the victims were young men, usually late teens to around 30. Often hitchhikers, often military, Marines, Air Force personnel, guys traveling, trying to get back to base, trying to get home, trying to get somewhere without much money and with a lot of trust in the wrong places. Investigators believe Kraft's routine was chillingly consistent. He'd pick someone up. He'd drug them. He'd assault them. He'd strangle them. And then he'd leave their bodies where they might not be discovered quickly, along freeways, in remote areas on the edges of towns, places where a body could become just another grim headline with no clear suspect. Some victims showed signs of prolonged suffering. Some were mutilated. Many were found nude or partially clothed. And if you're listening to this thinking, how did nobody connect this sooner? That's the brutal reality of cross-jurisdiction crime in the 1970s and early 1980s. Different counties, different states, different departments. No unified system that instantly flags patterns. No quick database search that says, hey, these details keep repeating along the same corridors. So for years, cases that may have been connected looked separate, isolated tragedies. A hitchhiker here, a military man there, a body found off a highway in one county, then another body in another county weeks later. And without a clear link, each investigation could stall out on its own island of paperwork. Once Kraft is under the microscope, detectives begin reaching backward through time. One early victim associated with him is Wayne Duquette, found in 1972 in Laguna Beach, strangled. At the time, it didn't automatically connect to anything else. But then more names and more years start landing on the timeline. By the mid-1970s and onward, there are cases like Keith Crotwell, a Marine connected to Camp Pendleton. More Marines later. More men found across California, and then beyond, Oregon comes up, Michigan comes up. The more investigators compare the list to the dead and missing, the more it feels like that traffic stop didn't just interrupt a crime. It interrupted what may have been an entire decade-long series. And then we get to the courtroom chapter, where the details get methodical and slow and heavy in a different way. Kraft's trial begins in 1988. It drags on for more than a year, 13 months, one of the longest California had seen at the time. Prosecutors were trying to do something difficult. Take a mountain of fragments spread across years and geography and turn it into a story a jury could understand, believe, and legally act on. The case included photographs found in Kraft's possession, personal items linked to victims. That list, the scorecard, sitting like a cold centerpiece to the entire narrative. And then there were survivor accounts. Men who said they'd been picked up, drugged, and later came to with gaps in their memory and a sense that something terrible had happened, something they couldn't fully piece together. At least one survivor described essentially coming back to consciousness and being let go. And if you can even imagine the aftermath of that, realizing later how close you may have been to becoming one more coded entry on that page, it's the kind of psychological scar that doesn't fade. Kraft himself didn't take the stand. His defense tried to poke holes where they could, arguing that the list could be interpreted in different ways, that some material could be seen as consensual, that the prosecution was building a case with circumstantial links. But the jury wasn't convinced. On August 12, 1989, Randy Kraft was convicted of 16 murders and sentenced to death. And as of today, he remains on death row, still maintaining that he's innocent, still never offering a full confession that could close the gap between suspicion and certainty for dozens of families. And that gap is the part that lingers. Because remember the list, 61 entries. He was convicted of 16 murders. That leaves 45 entries that don't have courtroom verdicts attached to them. 45. What do those entries represent? More victims whose bodies were never found, cases that were filed away separately and never officially connected, missing people whose families still don't know what happened, still living with the kind of uncertainty that never really ends. Cold case investigators in states like California, Oregon, and Michigan have revisited old files again and again. Modern DNA tools can help, but so much depends on what evidence still exists after all these years. Some cases from the 70s and 80s simply don't have the kind of preserved biological material that could answer questions now. Sometimes there's nothing left to test. Sometimes the trail ends at a freeway shoulder and an old report that says unidentified. And that's where I want to slow down for a moment, because with cases like this, the public conversation can get pulled toward the killer's nickname, the bizarre details, the coded list like it's some dark puzzle. But every phrase on that paper points back to a real person. Somebody who had friends. Somebody who called home. Somebody who had a job lined up, or plans with a buddy, or a birthday coming up. People who should have gotten to live ordinary lives. What haunts me about this case isn't only what Kraft is accused and convicted of doing. It's how long the pattern could exist without being fully seen. How easy it is, in a fragmented system, for violence to spread across borders and paperwork lines. How many chances there are for connections to be missed when information isn't shared, when resources are limited, and when victims come from groups that, historically, weren't always given the urgency and attention they deserved. So if you're sitting with this story feeling heavy, that makes sense. It is heavy, but telling it matters. Not to give the killer more myth, but to keep the focus where it belongs. On the victims, on the unanswered names, and on the lesson that patterns don't reveal themselves unless people are willing and able to compare notes, share data, and look beyond one jurisdiction at a time. Thanks for spending this time with me on Let's Talk About It. If you want to hear another case broken down like this, or you want an episode focused more on how investigations have changed since the 1980s, or even the psychology of offenders who live double lives, tell me what direction to go. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.